Our first panelist I'm introducing is Domini Kemp, chef, entrepreneur, food writer, and the chair of the Department of Justice Employers Forum. Domini Kemp is an award-winning chef, food writer, and entrepreneur. He's the founder and joint MD of the ITSA food group and runs the company with her sister, Peaches, great name, since 1989. The sisters were finalists in the E&Y Entrepreneur of the Year and runners of the Image Businesswoman of the Year. They oversee multiple restaurants, cafes and event catering operations, including Hugh Brown's in Brown Thomas, Grafton Street, and Feast Catering and Events. Domini has developed the PEP Entrepreneur Programme in Wheatfield Prison, which was recently turned into a 4-part documentary, Prison Breaks and Virgin Media, looking at ways to reduce the cost of recidivism through entrepreneurial activities for prisoners upon release. This work continues in her role as chair of the newly formed Department of Justice Employers Forum. You're very welcome to the panel, Domini.
Thank you.
Our next guest on the panel is Ger Redmond. Ger is a pro athlete and coach, recently seen on Irish television on the Ultimate Hell Week show. Ger Redmond is a former professional footballer from Dublin who has navigated his experience with criminal justice system to become a professional triathlete and soccer run and triathlete coach. He is also an ambassador for the Get the Message Out campaign from within Northside Partnership, the local development company for North East Dublin. The Get the Message Out campaign promotes alternatives to crime and drug-related activity. George just back from a triathlon as well also. He was done one in Barcelona recently where he done, was it 180 on the bike, 3.8 kilometres in a swim, and I think it was 42 kilometres on the run. So this was yesterday.
Next to Jordan, he's a Toonari's podcast alumni. We got the pleasure of interviewing Damien Quinn, and Damien gave his story, and one of the standout parts of the story was the politest prison break ever. He was up in Lockenhouse and he was leaving Lockenhouse, but he left a letter for the officer just so he wasn't worried and left. He's like, that's the best prison break story of all time. But do you know what? Damien spoke to us about goals and aspirations he've had. And we spoke to him last night at dinner and he's hit all those goals and some of them are here. So at the moment he's Community Education and Disability Officer at Galway Rural Development. He's from North Galway and he's coordinator of GRD's Social Enterprise Regeneration Project. In 2020 Damien graduated from UCC with a Masters in Cooperative and Social Enterprise. He has recently founded Spare Noah New Horizon, which has been developed from his own journey through the criminal justice system. Spare Noah is concerned with developing a solution to the problems criminal conviction disclosures present for people trying to move on from being previously convicted. Well done on everything, Damien. Thank you.
So the next guest we have is Siobhan Cafferty here on my left, one of the main ladies here today. So well done. Working for well done. So Siobhan Cafferty is the implementation manager for the criminal justice sector in Ireland. She works for Pobble on behalf of the Department of Justice, having developed the Working for Change social enterprise and employment strategy in 2001 to 2003 for the Department of Justice. She is currently leading out on its implementation. Siobhan is dedicated to improving the infrastructure to support social enterprises to ensure those furthest from the labour market are afforded the opportunity to work. She was recently named on the top 100 list of women in social enterprise in 2022 in Europe as part of the Elusive Network. Prior to her current role, Siobhan was the CEO of the Bridge Product and a probation-funded community-based organisation in the Liberties, Dublin. Siobhan Cafferty.
We have a question here prepared just to kick it off, but I'm sure it'll flow naturally after this. So this is for Damien and Domini first. What do you see as the primary social barriers to people who wish to progress from and stay out of the criminal justice system? Ladies first.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me today. I would suppose that there are several barriers, and I guess it's tackling prejudice, tackling the idea that people with convictions shouldn't be considered with regards to the same opportunities that we give others. And I think you spoke about the barriers and lack of confidence that you can have, and I think it's critical that we as employers not just give people an opportunity, but actually in relation to our own workforce, in relation to our own HR policies, that we're seeing the person opposite us and not necessarily seeing the baggage behind them, and that we're not judging people but giving people the opportunity and that second chance. And I think that's it's a critical part of breaking down those barriers and just having fairer communities across the board.
Like to Quinn, Damien?
Yeah, well, I suppose to me, first of all, I would never use an opportunity like this to excuse criminal behaviour. Obviously, I did something that warranted me being sent there, but when I realised then that I needed to change and there was opportunities within the system to do that, I grabbed that. I looked for every opportunity, took it and ran with it, and naively, I believed that the end date of my punishment, the sentence, was the end of me having to live with my past. But that's actually when the punishment starts. So when you talk about barriers, it's getting a house, getting a job, getting into education, getting insurance, start your own business, leaving the country, volunteering, And every time I tried to put myself forward for any of that, with all of these qualifications that I got in prison and all of this job readiness training I got in prison, doors just kept popping up and I just regressed. And I tried for a while. I remember I had these really smart pair of shoes. I used to get myself all dressed up and go and look for work. But that smart pair of shoes, the heel was worn off them, and knocking on doors looking for work, and you just get so withdrawn from it all. What's the point? And I regressed, and I ended up right back to where I started. And that's down to policy. That's down to people not willing to hear us out and give a chance. That's down to a lack of open-mindedness. So look, barriers are they're insurmountable for people like me, but they're fixable for people like you. So it's great to see you all here.
Do you know, if somebody is successful with applying for the job and an employer gives them an opportunity, what are the, I suppose, positive characteristics that they could bring to the role, or what has the employer to gain by taking the punt on them?
From my point of view, I think employment is obviously a game changer. I think the whole recruitment process, James, is hugely complicated. Any employer here will know that actually the HR team are probably the most stressed, in particular now at the moment. I think what I would say to employers today is be open to recruiting from alternative sources of talent. And I think when you have a staff team that is diverse, as society is, all of a sudden you start to have new ideas, fresh ideas, connections. You also have, I suppose, a responsive team where you're able to potentially look at things differently as a whole organisation. So I think for employers here today who aren't already recruiting, and I should say that actually there are an awful lot of employers here who are recruiting people and have been for a long period of time. For those that aren't, I would say that when you give people the opportunity, and the word opportunity keeps coming up time and time and time again, we saw it in the video, Damien has just mentioned it, any job for any individual. I mean, I'm thinking of myself when I came out of school and I was 16 and I was just like, I just needed an opportunity. An opportunity for work is crucial. I think when someone has a criminal record, that opportunity needs to be magnified, I suppose, in a way. And I think as they go into that organisation, what they bring with them is resilience. Huge amount of resilience. When you see the videos, when you hear the stories, when you hear what Rory said about people, the difficulty didn't start when they went to prison. The difficulty was many, many years often before. Missed opportunities, we've heard missed opportunities in terms of education. Just because you grew up on a particular street or an area of Dublin, Cork, Galway, wherever it might be, that your opportunities were limited from the time that you were born. That, I suppose, in a way, is what sometimes leads people to be maybe addicted, mental health issues, they might end up in prison. However, what also comes with those individuals is that ability and that resilience to overcome difficulties. Damien talking about wearing out his shoes, that is sheer determination that is in someone that makes them also an incredible employee.
Yeah, it's true. And when you think about it, like if you're in prison or addiction, and then you're presenting for an interview, you probably have to do a lot more in your life to get to that place than the regular person. You know, you have to navigate the criminal justice system. You probably have to go through addiction treatment, rehab, personal development. You know, become self-aware, and like the long-term planning, the staying the course. You know, the loads of characteristics that are transferable into private industry as well, aren't there?
No, exactly, and I don't think there's anybody that I've ever met either as being an interviewer or an interviewee that actually likes the interview process. It's terrifying. We also, I mean, in a way, we have to find an alternative way of sourcing talent, of finding talent, because sitting in front of someone for 45 minutes being grilled by 3 people is petrifying for anybody. So if you're coming and you know that you have this secret, this hidden thing that's behind you, we heard about it earlier on, you know, that pebble in the shoe that Sinead spoke about, you know, that you're not going to be your best self, you know, and I can understand why people who've been through the system just don't bother. And I suppose the Working to Change strategy is about trying to make sure that we support people at every single hand's turn to be ready for work. But also that if they just feel that that's too much, but also there is that element of and support for self-employment, entrepreneurship. And there's fantastic entrepreneurs that come through the prison system and probation system, and we need to be able to encourage that too. But for those who just find the whole interview process really challenging, there is that also the avenue then for self-employment potentially.
Exactly. Jordan, if I can bring you into the conversation, I know you do a bit of work with some of the young lads in Oberstown. Do you want to tell us a little bit about maybe what the barriers might be for them? Because I remember when I worked in Cork Education and Training Board, I came across a term called NEET, Not in Employment, Education and Training. And it was like this 18 to 24-year-old group that's like they're sort of reaching hardest to, like, how do you find working with that type of, or that cohort of young people, and what are the challenges you see there?
So the main challenges I would see in Oberstown is when the young kids get out, they've no crutch. I mean, I think in this country we do a lot of containment. Everything is we're locked up. There's lots of resources there. There's nothing on preventive. When them young lads get out, because 90% of them don't have families, when they get straight out, they haven't got that crutch to help them into employment or help them into, say, a gym or something, to give them something to live for. They just go straight back into the streets with their mates, and then the peer pressure is back into the gangs. So that's all they know. So I think what we do need is some sort of a post that when they get out, they have some sort of a group that they go to that can lead them around or get them jobs. Like my idea was, say for instance a guy, because a lot of kids come to Oberstown, it's the only juvenile centre in the country. So I was thinking if we could say a kid was in there and he was getting out, we could from Dublin say, I could go to a local company and say, look, this kid's getting out, can you give him a job? He's getting out Monday, at least he's straight into something. So he has something to go straight into rather than back to the streets. Because a lot of them, it's just like a revolving door. And a lot of them in there, they don't have that source at home, a role model, like a mother or father, or even an uncle, because the uncle is selling drugs, or, you know, and that's what they're faced with. And it's back to the peer pressure of joining the gangs. So there's actually nothing for it. Oberstown is a great place as far as prisons go. It's a great prison for kids. They have everything there, all the education, the sports. Might be a gym out there, they've invested. There's an amount of money that they'll invest into the kids, but for me, that's not enough. One, we need a preventative measure in this country, which we don't have. So everything is done on percentages, like they get locked up. Why do you get locked up? You know, it's usually, there's no role models at home that let do what they want. But there's nothing being done in their areas, in the private areas, on a bigger measure on preventative. Look, I'd like to see some super youth centres in there and look more at the trauma. I mean, you need to look at the root cause of why these kids and adults are going to prisons, and not on containment. Like, they'll throw money at containment all day long on educating kids or like ourselves in the prison. But when you get out then, you're just back to, you know, just what you know. So I think what we need is some sort of a group that when the kids come out, they have something set up ready for them to help them along the way, and use the education that they learned in Northstown or in Mountjoy or wherever, and let's utilise that education and bring it into the community and give them jobs and use the stuff that we're learning.
Or even just give them a skill.
Yeah.
Even if they could have a skill for life, even a trade or something like that, because a lot of people within the prison and prison setting, they love to work with their hands. If you ever look at the school in the prison, the classrooms with the art, the woodwork, the guitar, the music, they're packed. They are absolutely packed because lads are inside in those rooms and they're using their hands. It's a practical thing that they're at, and for me it was like that in school. I loved woodwork and I loved art. Everything else I hated, unless it was the science lab and we got our hands on the Bunsen burners, but that was about it. But I think it's very important as well to look at the young lads. A lot of them would be great at practical skills, and I think maybe pushing them a little bit down that route and getting some form of a place where they could get skills like carpentry, plumbing, electrics and stuff, and work them up into that area. They could go out into the workforce and make good money where they wouldn't have to do all the other things, and they're still working with their hands.
Yeah, we get like a pre-apprenticeship in the prisons would be good for them. But for me, it's all well and good introducing that into the prisons, but we need to also, when they get out, have something ready for them to get into. Otherwise, it's useless. And it really is useless, because the kids in Overstown are coming in and out, and I'm seeing them coming in for a month, and then they're out, and they're back in, and they're out. And they tell me they're just going back out, hanging around with their mates and robbing cars. So we need a crutch for them. They're only kids, like I still haven't grown up than 40. I never had a role model, I never had a more than 40 at the age of 15. I didn't have, someone to show me how it's done, and these kids are the same. So when they get out, they're just back to what they were doing, because that's all they know. They don't know love, they don't know care, they don't have them skills. So all they know is crime, and that's where they're comfortable. Like I've been fixing myself the last probably 8 years. Now that I'm fixed, I don't feel comfortable with it. I sometimes wish I was back there. So, it can be strange that you fix yourself and then you're uncomfortable being fixed. If that makes sense.
Yeah. If I could just jump in there, just kind of following on from what Ger said. First of all, that's really profound to say. I fixed myself and it took 8 years. That's incredible. So well done on that one, Ger. But however, I think what Ger highlights. I think what Ger really highlights is the fact that the both Oberstown Prison and probation projects around the country, for which there's over 60, unless I'm wrong, Fiona, is that the case? Over 60. So doing incredible work, and I think it's about building on that. It's about saying, how do we make sure that how we prepare people when they're with us and we have a duty of care to them, how do we best prepare them for the next step? Because that shouldn't be jumping off a cliff. Because I tell you, if it was, I wouldn't be doing it. I wouldn't want to have any part to play in that. We have to make sure that there's that seamless transition. So let's not wait until people are finished prison. Let's not wait until they're finished on their supportive probation project before we link them in with employers. And in fact, through the work of the change strategy, many of the employers in this room are linking in with us to make sure that what happens in the prison environment or in probation projects around the country are that people get the training that is needed for their identified skills gaps. So all of a sudden, we're not just training people for any old vacancy, because that doesn't work. I wouldn't go into any job if I hated it. I'd be gone in 2 weeks, and that's the same for everybody else, not just people with convictions. When we train people well to do the jobs where there are identified gaps, and it's also a job that they have the skills and talents and interests in, that's when we see the magic happen. That's when we see the likes of Damien and Ger doing things that they love, the lads here, and many, many other people. So what I would do, and I call out to the employers here today, if you're not engaging with us, I would ask you to come meet with us. Help us to make sure that our system is responsive as possible to what your needs are. We're not always going to get it right, I'll hold my hands up. And that takes a lot for me to say, actually. We won't always get it right. However, we're willing to try. We need to be able to do this. We need to change how we're doing things, because when we see it done well, it works incredibly well for individuals, families and communities.
Yeah, very well said. If we can bring Domini back in. So one of the, I suppose, challenges that people like ourselves face is, let's say you're in a job interview and it's going really well, and then you're thinking like, do I drop it in here with context, or do I wait for the Garda vet to arrive down the line with no context? And that's an awkward dilemma, because when you present to an interview, you could be all dolled up to the nines, and you have your research done on the project, and then you say, oh, by the way, I have 30 criminal convictions, I've been in this prison, and then it's like very awkward for the employer even. But like, what can we do to make that conversation, to have open conversations? Like, what can we do with the employers and the employees?
So I think one of the first things is looking at your HR policies as a company. So I would hope that most people applying for jobs with us are fairly clear on our own stance. And actually, interestingly, Google have changed the wording in their email signatures to also show that they are open to recruiting people with criminal convictions. And I think for larger companies like that are very blue chip and well respected and very well resourced, the fact that they are coming out and making that sort of statement in black and white is very encouraging for smaller businesses and SMEs. I suppose because of my own involvement with the Prison Entrepreneur Programme and stuff in Wheatfield, as I said, I think people are clear on where I sit and where our HR policies sit. We have a direct relationship with some of the prisons in relation to employment opportunities. And again, some of those connections are made with individuals while they're in the prison. So we talk about the interview process and how challenging that can be. And also then the first few weeks when you come out of prison and you're at a bit of a loss. Things might be a bit chaotic from a personal perspective. Your family set up, having a home, having an address, being able to set up a bank account, all these things that many people without convictions take for granted as part and parcel of their everyday life. These are massive barriers to overcome. And having that understanding as a potential employer as to maybe why somebody isn't responsive, they may not have a phone, they may not have an email address, they may not have a home address, all of these things, we have to be more understanding and support people with that. So I can ring up the bank and try and set up an account and have a roaring fight with the person at the end of the phone. But somebody who's just come out of prison is not going to be able to do that. And so try and have those fights for people on their behalf. That's really important. And the other thing I would say is it could be easy for me to say that people who have convictions should declare it. I'm not the person who has to declare that. But I would think I would hope that if companies are more open and their HR policies are more open, that people would feel more comfortable declaring that. And I don't want to use the for owning it, but that sense, because things tend to come out anyway, regardless. And I think if we can find a way to have those more open conversations, I think if people are able to declare these things up front and know that colleagues are not going to have an issue with it, and that it's okay, I think that's huge. And I think giving people that sense of confidence and the fact that they don't have to have shame. You know, they've served their sentence, justice should be served, it's time to move on and genuinely give people a second chance.
Damien, I have a question for you. What is the ideal process in your mind for somebody who has been to prison or in the criminal justice system going in to look for a job? Would it be something like walking in there, right, having the guard vetting there, but also then giving the 8 years that you've been in recovery, the education, because we usually don't get that opportunity to be able to speak about the 11 years of recovery, the 6 years of therapy, the further education, the honours degree, you know, the masters. So how would you, what would be the ideal one for you?
Well, I suppose for me anyways, first of all, the ideal world would be not a situation where we look at the very worst things we do in our lives. It's a situation where we look at the skills that the individual brings to the interview. So basically people call you in based on your CV, you know, so then you find you go through the aptitude test, you go through the health and fitness test, and you have other discussions about kind of what you know about the company. And then just before you go, one last question, have you got any convictions? Well, yes, I have. And this is what they are, and they're from a very, very long time ago. But since that time, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, and you try and flip the conversation. But like them situations, I call and I've heard it penned, I think it's Chad Maruna that penned this, degradation ceremonies, you know. So you're going in there and you're talking about things you'd like to forget about and move on from, you know, and it's such a hard thing to do, you know. Obviously, like, people do need to know certain things about individuals, in reason, you know, whether if it impacts on the way in which they will, the business will be managed, you know, if it impacts on that, then fair enough. But for the most part, like, it doesn't. Like, that particular situation was working nights on an assembly floor. Highly unlikely I'd come into contact with children and vulnerable adults, but that's what the Act is there to do, is to protect anybody, or children and vulnerable adults, from anybody that has the capacity to endanger them. Now, a few of us around this table know that we would absolutely hate to be categorised as such, you know, as a risk to children and vulnerable adults, but that's what that Act does to us, you know, and that's why we don't put ourselves out there where we see guard vetting is required, you know, and like, we self-select, we deselect ourselves based on that, like, and any job I applied for, when vetting let me down, I knew full well I could do it standing on my head, but I couldn't get over that, and that needs to be fixed. I mean,
What way, how would you fix it?
so let's look at the steps out of a life of crime we take. Let's look at what we, like, when I went to Castlereagh, before I got there, like, I knew there was opportunities to become job ready, to become educated. I knew all that was available to me, and I naively believed I'd hit the ground running because I did everything I possibly could to get myself there. But, like, when I got out, then it was all this whole negativity around kind of what I did. Like, I got caught with drugs, and I got into fights, and that was pretty normal where I was growing up. You know, everybody kind of did. I'm not excusing it, but that's what it was. I didn't kill anybody. I certainly didn't harm anybody intentionally, or get into fights for no good reason. You know, I avoid stuff like that. But it comes up and again and again and again. So, like, what happened with me, I gave up looking for work, you know, and that's when I got peace of mind, because I resigned to the fact that I was probably not going to get a job. You know, I was not going to be able to contribute, despite the fact that I'd done all this stuff. And luckily, Equal Ireland came along, and there was a course in business and community development, and I heard this notion of empowering the most marginalised people in society, you know, empowering disadvantaged communities, and you know what, I seen that as a way to study first of all and fill my day, but as a way to give back, and then look, I hooked onto that.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned Chad Marone there as well. And like, I remember again when I was studying, so a lot of people like ourselves, when we go on the recovery journey or the assistance journey, when we're looking at education, we tend to go into jobs or careers around the third sector, community, youth work, social care, addiction services, because that's probably the one area where all that negativity is probably, it's not the one area, but it's the one area where it's probably accepted a bit more. But and Siobhan talks about the wounded healers, you know, people that are wounded but don't want to go and help others. But it's a lot harder to break into the other private sectors where they might have the knowledge around, you know, some of the backgrounds we might have. But what do you think we can do around there? Like, is there something like training for HR teams or?
No, you're right, James. I think we need to take a bit of a multidisciplinary approach to that answer. I think we absolutely need to educate HR companies, and thankfully there's some here now today that we will hopefully be working with in the future. We need to educate them as to how we can support people with criminal histories and also those from marginalised backgrounds into employment, and have a look at where's the commonality between that, you know, and how can we help all of those individuals to do that. I think from the individual's point of view, I think we also need to be able to support people to be able to disclose in a way where it's situating their past. So, you know, as Damien said 8 years ago, whatever it might have been, yes, I do have a criminal record, that was 8 years ago. Since then I have ... And I think what I would say to employers here today who aren't familiar with the Garda vetting process, the Garda vetting process isn't a yes or no answer for you. I think that's a really, really crucial thing for you to know. If someone, you have to Garda vet someone and it comes back that they have convictions, that's not an indication to you as an employer to say no and that person is now discounted. It is very much a process of saying, now we know what this individual has done, let's have another conversation. And that's all we're asking of you as employers. Have another conversation. Okay, I see that you do have a criminal record. what have you done since? And I can guarantee if that person is sitting in front of you, they've done a hell of a lot to be sitting in that seat. So unfortunately, the Garda vetting process provides one viewpoint of an individual, and it's all negative, all negative. Damien's project that he's working on now, and hopefully you might speak about it now, is about trying to rebalance that a wee bit and start to have a look at, well, let's balance that out. Let's make sure that the individual has the opportunity to be able to say, actually, do you know what, since then, I got my Gaisce Gold Award, I've done my Red Cross programme, I've done my AVP programme, I've done my third level education, I've gone to the Unlock Potential Initiative. All of the stuff that we have here today, everything that's here today is something that an individual can share and should share with an employer. So the employers here today, we need for you to ask that question and not say no when convictions come back on the Garda vetting form.
Do you want to tell us about Spare Noah?
Yeah, so when I was studying, luckily I got work, which enabled me to pay for further studies, but as I was studying, I went on to a master's course, and I was asked to do a course in recognition of prior learning, mentoring and facilitation as well. Now, recognition of prior learning, it looks at your experiential learning, your accredited learning, and it looks at whether or not it matches learning outcomes of taught courses in college. And if the colleges and the ETVs are satisfied that the experience matches these outcomes, then it's validated and it's certified, and you just get the certificate. It's given to you. So when I heard that, I said, why are we not using that for criminal conviction disclosures? We're looking at a point in time, which is our own fault, first of all, but we're looking at a point in time that will never change. It will change, but that won't change. And recognition of prior learning is evidence-based. You can't get around it. You have to demonstrate that you know these things and you've learnt these things. So what we're doing with Spirinua is we're using what's the word I'm looking for? A similar model to that, and looking at the steps out of a life of crime people take and attaching a value to that, such as engaging with the ISM officer in the Integrated Sentence Management Programme. So you meet with an ISM officer now. That wasn't in place when I was in prison, but you get told how you can spend your time in prison. You can avail of certain psychotherapy, drug addiction. You can go to workshops. You can go to education units. You can do all these things with your time. And then getting out the gate, then that information should be passed into the community. This enhanced regime. These individuals have been of good behaviour. Like when I got out the gate, that was day one. But I had the 3 years of this type of stuff that didn't come with me, and didn't have a value attached to it. So look, that's where we're at. We want, through Spirinua, we're looking at an up-to-date, current view of the individual. Nobody can guarantee rehabilitation. Nobody can guarantee that with any certainty. Some chaos might happen next week that might knock us off our path. But what we can do is we can prove right up to date this individual has done everything they possibly can to become job ready, employable, rebuild their lives, give back to the community, all this kind of stuff. They've earned their chance to move on, and this should be an end date for their punishment. Every punishment should have an end date.
Exactly. Domini, if I can bring you in again, and the employers forum, what kind of concerns do employers have or challenges they face? Because I know sometimes I've had this experience, somebody very close to me where they're practically offered the job, but then the board of management intervene and they put a stop to it. So for companies, then there might be boards of directors, so with the best will in the world, the decision sometimes is taken over their hand. What kind of challenges do employers face or concerns do they have?
So there's some basic ones around, say, insurance. A very clear one would be, say, motor insurance, and say somebody has motoring convictions that can throw up genuine problems for an employer. But sometimes people just are nervous about it, and they are worried about the public perception, they're worried about their reputation. And, we've spoken to HR managers who are really active in this area, and as they say, sometimes it's not plain sailing, and it's okay to admit that and say, yeah, sometimes it's not so straightforward, and sometimes there can be challenges with integration. We also don't know if other colleagues maybe have been a victim of crime, and they may personally have a real issue with this as a company policy. So we have to be mindful of everyone's perspective. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is actually have a more inclusive society, but also a more inclusive workspace. Because not only will that benefit your business, it will change your perspective, but it also really benefits the communities and the next generation of kids. So there are all these knock-on effects, but it's not straightforward. It's not always simple. And as I said, people can just be nervous. They have a preconceived notion, and it's a little bit like when I brought people into the prison, they've seen too many American TV dramas, and they have a preconceived notion of what it's going to be like, and it's very different. And they're blown away by, I suppose, the resources within the prison, the opportunities for education and change, and also the prison officers. Again, preconceived notions of what the relationships are often like between some of the prisoners and the prison officers, the schools within the prisons. So it's about challenging people's beliefs. People can just be prejudiced, they can just want to discriminate, they can do all these things. They have their position. It's up to us to keep challenging those and shine a light on maybe why those prejudices need to change.
So there's a lot of employers here today. How does your company deal with the process of employing people with convictions and prison sentences? How do you go about bringing them into your company?
We make it very clear, it's on all our emails, that we are open to hiring and considering people with criminal convictions as appropriate. As I said, you might have somebody with a motoring conviction. There would be a reason why we couldn't give them a delivery driving job, for example, because we wouldn't get insurance. So that's a kind of clear cut. That's not a prejudice. That's an issue that we have to work with in terms of challenging insurance companies and all of that. But I think making sure that it's very clear that you have an open policy, that your HR policy is open to considering people with convictions. That's the first step. And then challenging the HR manager themselves. How do you potentially have a more realistic interview process with somebody who might be nervous, maybe doesn't quite believe that it's okay to admit it, and also then how do you deal with it internally? If that person gets the job, do they want it to be known? Are they going to actually discuss it with the colleagues? How do you deal with that in terms of that onboarding process? And that's something that isn't 100% clear, and I don't know if we have a complete best practice. There's been good examples in the UK of how that's worked in terms of integration. As I said, I think it's better to be open and honest, because I think these things always come out eventually. And I think but it's up to the candidate, and I think that's really important. It's not for me to tell them what they should disclose.
Yeah, and I think it makes it easier to disclose that if it says on the ad explicitly that people from all sorts of backgrounds are welcome to apply. That makes it a little bit easier, rather than being up in your head thinking, should I or should I not? They're often inviting you to say it if you have it. So that makes it a little bit easier. If I come to you, Joe, what kind of challenges or maybe opportunities did you face when you kind of started getting yourself together at post-prison?
So when I initially got out, I was a fitter by trade. So when I got out, I went for lots of jobs. I had a good CV there, and I was getting nothing. Nothing was coming back. And I went to a jobs club to update my CV. And the guy actually told me in there, he said, change the name. So my name is G-E-R-A-R-D, so I changed to G-E-R-A-L-D. And I sent CVs and I got interviews straight away. But that only got me in the door, And when you have 5 kids, you're like, do I tell the truth? Or do I try to get some money for food? So initially I was living a lie. I was getting jobs. I remember one time I got a job in the local, I lived in Baldoyle, so I got a job in the local factory as a fitter. And I was just fabricating. And then I was put up into the airport. And I went through a process at the airport. And within about 3 hours, I was working on the conveyor belts. And 2 guards come down, flung me out, basically just escorted me out of the building. So that was the first time, and I was mortified going through, through people who were going on holidays, and I'm like getting escorted. Then I went for my taxi license, because I've reached so many times. I got a job in the tobacco factory, same thing. HR sussed that I had a different name on it, got sacked. And you live in the line, you're going to work on when we're going to be let go, And you feel, even though people probably don't know you've been convicted, you feel like a convict. You feel like an outsider, they're looking at me. Probably not looking at you, but that's how you feel. So I went for a taxi license, and that was another issue. Then I passed me test, 3 goals, passed the test. Got refused, had to go to court. was in court 3 times, refused, and I actually saved the woman's life, and that's what actually got me the licence in the end. I went up to court, and the guard that was in charge said, what happened in Malahide? Long story short, I learned how to swim as a triathlete. Swim out, saved some woman, and he goes, if you don't ask for today, the next one you come, I'll give you a licence. So at Christmas time, he gave me the licence. And that was the only way I got it, you know, for saving some woman.
That's a round of applause.
I don't know what I was going to say at the life of, because I was persistent. But again, I think the guard would give me the opportunity anyway. I did true change, and I think once you make true change in life, it's known and it's seen, you know. Because before that, I would have been stopped every day. And you know, when you do make true change, like, it does shine through, you know. And people will see that, especially like the guard will know, because I told them daily it was acting Maggie.
What's the legalities of somebody in a job where I'm not working with vulnerable people, or they're not involved with finances, of an employer actually going doing their research and attacking somebody? Do employers have a right to do that in all contexts of jobs?
I think the whole area is very tricky, and I think that that's the reason why when Domini was saying, you know, that there are a lot of unknowns, there's fears, there's whatever, and I think when there's fear, it's easier to say no. And I think with a lot of employers, that's where we're at with some of them. But thankfully, as I said, we've got an awful lot who are willing to take people on. I think the whole thing around disclosure, you know, if you are working with vulnerable adults and children, that organisation is compelled legally to conduct Garda vetting. And the Garda vetting process, as I said, will come back with that person's list of convictions, and then the conversation has to happen. Does this person have convictions that mean that they cannot work with vulnerable adults or children? If that's the case, well then that person is not going to be suitable for that role. So there are systems there to protect vulnerable adults and children, and they're there for a very valid reason. However, I think that, you know, there's grey areas sometimes around that, and I think that we need further clarification around all of that. So thankfully, under the Working to Change strategy, myself and my colleague Ken Keating here from the department will be meeting with the National Guard, the Vetting Bureau, very soon to make sure that everybody is clear around those processes. And I think, you know, for employers, social enterprises nationwide, we all need to know what is our obligation, what do we need to do. But that shouldn't stop us from giving people an opportunity. The main thing is that we need supports for the employers, so the fears that Domini spoke about there, that we're able to answer them, or able to answer them clearly, and that again, we're in the process of doing all of that.
Brilliant, brilliant. We're going to finish, as always, true to an early style on a positive note. So if I can get maybe a contribution from each of the panelists just around some of the positive aspects of what you're doing at the moment, and maybe stuff that we can look forward to.
Can I just ask a question? Would it benefit employers to see the work that prisons do with people, through the education, through the work training, Gaisce and Red Cross? Like you spoke there, your eyes were opened when you went into Wheatfield, and you see the different side of it. Would it benefit employers to see the work that's done within the prisons? Because you said there people have a vision of what a prison is. But that vision is blurred. Would employers themselves see a different prison, a different environment, if they were allowed to see what was going on?
You can talk to us afterwards, right? Because I'll tell you why, if we open up this for Q&A, we'll be here for the day.
Can I just answer that?
Bill? One response.
Yeah, so a really good question. The Irish Prison Service is very open to having employers in. We've had a number of employers into different prisons. It does absolutely help. COVID has obviously put paid to that for a little while. Again, if there are employers in this room here today, I'll be very open for you to come up to me afterwards, and I can speak with Karen, and we can absolutely organise those visits. Seeing is believing from everybody's point of view, in particular for people who are in the system still, who hopefully will see this on the podcast or on the Prison TV channel. Opportunities are there. There are employers here today who are ready, willing and able to take you on once you're released or finishing your probation sanction. But for those who aren't quite there, the prisons are open to them, to going in and seeing them. So yeah, more than happy to organise those visits.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm sorry, lads, I'm not allowed to open the floor for Q&A. I'd love to. There's so many interesting people here, but we'd never be able to get around, and we've trains at 6 o'clock as well. But thanks.
If you go into the prison, you'll be left back out as well straight away. So.
But I suppose we finish on a positive, maybe, or just a question towards one thing you would change in the system currently, or maybe one positive thing that's working in the system. Maybe we'll go left of the deal, or Siobhan, and I can pass the mic on that.
Oh God, jeez, why did you start with me? I've lost this.
Fair speaker.
Huh? One, and this is a little bit obscure. I think one positive thing that's really happening at the moment is the fact that all of Irish government departments are now following what the Department of Justice are doing in terms of social procurement. So social procurement, very briefly, is when a government, public body, government department spends wisely. It's our money that they're spending, it's taxpayers' money that they're spending. When they spend that money and include social clauses like Karen mentioned earlier on, all of a sudden the benefit of that spend has an impact on the individuals for which we have a duty of care to. So the video earlier on, the bounce back recycling video, hugely positive, incredible people doing incredible work. They were successful in receiving one of the contracts to remove and recycle all of the prison mattresses. So from the prison service point of view, they needed the mattresses removed from their warehouse, their waste management facility areas. There's now 2 social enterprises who are going in and removing those. They're being recycled instead of going to buried landfill. It's a fraction of the cost. It shouldn't be about cost. I will put that in though as well. However, those contracts have now created 4 full-time positions, which are being filled by people who have been in the system. That's common sense. That's the positive thing that I would take out of today. David Snedden from Google isn't here. However, I did say to him after the Karen's piece this morning, Sinead, I said, I'll be talking to you, David, about social clauses in your own contracts here in Google, and he's very open to that. So that would be my positive take.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so for me, I suppose the message I'd like to see everybody go away with is how transformational employment can be. So, like, in fairness, education is power, like, but without without employment, I couldn't pay for it. Do you know what I mean? So, employment is life transformational, and like, I moved myself into positions that when I finally got a job, to be able to hire other people. You know, today I work for a local development company. I teach in a college that turned me down. Do you know what I mean? All this stuff is going on. Like, so, like, I hope you can see that change is possible. It's certainly what I've changed, and other people are changing too, and they're doing everything they possibly can. And you can play a huge part in that journey. So, thanks to everyone for coming.
Yeah, for me, the fact that we're all here today is very positive. Generation change is very close to my heart. I came from a bad generation. My granddad was locked up, my dad, myself, and then when my son was born, I changed the generation. So the fact that this name is here is very ironic. The fact that you guys took the day off work is very positive, and now we're talking about this, and all the companies around here are all like-minded people. So it's a very positive day for me. It's very close to my heart. So thanks to everyone for turning up. Just for employers and other people who have been through stuff that, the likes of myself, the lads have been through, growing up, it's easy for us to point the finger at young kids who are in prison, and when they get out and they live in their areas and you're like scumbags or whatever. But there's a real cause to everyone's problems, and you don't know what goes behind closed doors. I wouldn't tell you what went behind my doors, but don't look at that kid and think it's a problem child, because there's a reason for that. So if you take that positive, take that. Kids out there who are troubled, there's a big reason for that trouble. Not all kids, but 90% of them. So,
I would say it's people who are employers who are genuinely interested in supporting these initiatives. I would just urge people to make sure that you're really genuine about this. Don't be getting involved or trying to do this because it's a do-gooder exercise. It's not. It's not always easy, but for me, one of the biggest benefits has been when I've gone into the prison, I've been teaching the guys in there, they come up with a business plan, they're released, and they either find employment or they get their business started. And when you see that cycle changing on those days of visitations where it's mums going in, bringing children, and you're seeing the same cycle over again, when you break that cycle, you change that person's life, you change their family's life, and, you know, potentially their community. So there is such a huge benefit, and it's so easy. This is such an easy thing to do, but it does require commitment, and it does require a little bit of perseverance. Not always plain sailing, but honestly, it is really transformational. So thanks everyone for showing up.
Thank you.
Thank you. What about you? Where would you like to see change, James?
Oh, there's a curveball now. I'd like to see more diversity in prominent positions. Like somebody on the HR team has lived experience, but like us, you know. Like we were on Nationwide the other day, but it kind of come about because one of the producers, you know, has been affected by some of the issues we speak about. So they bring a different insight into the team that wouldn't ordinarily be there, and then you get a different kind of a product, you know. So diversity, like it's great that we're working in, as I said earlier on, a lot of people working in, you know, the caring professions and stuff like that. But I'd love to see people working in as directors, or I was appointed as a director to Cork Simon. It was on the Irish Times. Like we get to a place where that's not a huge story, do you know what I mean? Like that people are in good prominent positions with lived experience like us. That's what I think would be great for us to be. You've been a beautiful panel. Thank you for your insights and contributions. You're free to go.
Just there's one thing I just wanted to mention as well. If there are employers here and they're just questioning it in their own heads, if they want to really see change, somebody that was inside in prison, had lots of criminal convictions and whatever, etc., maybe watch one or two of our podcasts there where we've had guests who were in prison, and just listen to their own backgrounds if you want to get to know somebody and figure out where they're actually after coming from and what they actually had to go through in their own lives, and why, an important word, why they became the way they did, you know, why they acted out in certain ways, why they became involved in crime, violence, drugs, you know. So if that would be something I'd like to see people change, is look into the why instead of you're no good, you know. Look into the why people are a certain way. So thank you.
Yeah. And if you like what we do, you can support us on Patreon. I'll just throw that in there as well.